Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, it's not easy being green. This is The Green Knight. Welcome to the Blast Zone.
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The Green Knight, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
I think we both might have experienced a version of this. We sit around all summer, sweating, complaining, going, dang, it's hot. I wish it would cool off. And then finally, it cools off, and your body goes, I do not like this. I'm going to make you feel sick just because the weather changed. That might be the cause. It could be a lot of things. It could be allergies. It could be a bug that you just happened to catch at the same time the weather changed. But what it definitely is ironic.
Don't you think?
And annoying as heck.
Yeah, not to put too fine a point on it, but it got down to the mid-50s in New England overnight.
Wow.
When it's been in the 90s almost every day for months. It's tough to adjust body-wise. It's been great for sleeping.
Yes, I agree.
I've been getting a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
Very cozy-wozy. But it doesn't come without its downsides as well. So yeah, we both have been dealing with a little frogginess, a little just general unwellness.
Something hanging over. It's not fun.
It's unfortunate. So since you were probably stuck inside due to your not feeling 100%, did you happen to watch anything that you wanted to share with the listeners?
I sure did. I'm bringing something a little irregular, not quite cheating, but it's a movie I watched for research for this week's movie, but it also became the thing that I most wanted to talk about. It is 2017's A Ghost Story, a movie by David Lowery, the maker of The Green Knight. It stars Casey Affleck, Rooney Mara, and my first reaction when I watched this movie, which I had to write down right away, was like, wow, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I felt so strongly in that moment. It was bringing me to tears over and over. It was one of those movies that just really made me feel feelings, so much so that I knew that if I didn't write it down right away, I wouldn't believe it later, how much I enjoyed it and how strongly it made me feel. And it's already like that intensity has worn off. But it's a really good movie. I'm highly recommending it to people. It's a movie that explores the idea of what if ghosts were a little bit whimsical and also crushingly sad. So it explores ideas of death and grief and love and the meaning of life. Lowery makes these beautiful, bold, stylistic choices that are outside of your typical Hollywood filmmaking stuff. So a lot of people might find it challenging to sync up with the movie's mood and its pace, which can be very slow and quiet. But it's so powerful, and I took so much meaning from it with so little said in the movie. One of the signatures of Lowery's style is they're never very dialogue heavy. There's a lot of quiet moments and a lot of visual storytelling. I also have to say this movie is not a dirge. It's not a one-note sad downer of a movie. One of the things that I especially loved about it was like he throws in these moments where he'll set you up with something that just seems weird or quirky or is straight up funny, but then still he'll take that moment, whip it around on itself, and hit you with another gut punch of emotion. He was really making me feel feelings, doing it in a masterful way.
Yeah, you really went deep into the Lowery-verse in your research for this movie. You also watched 2013's his debut feature, Ain't Them Body Saints.
Also really good. Also the same cast.
Right. And it makes you wonder, like, how close were we to getting Casey Affleck as the Green Knight in this movie instead of Dev Patel? He sure does seem to enjoy casting him and stuff, but we'll get into it later. But he made the right call.
He made a good call.
I was half expecting you to show up with long legs, considering you felt brave enough to start it, at least.
I started it, but I didn't have legs to finish it. I'm 30 minutes into long legs. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get through it. It's fun.
It's fun. Interesting. I don't know that I've heard Longlegs described as fun by anyone yet.
I mean, I'm in the early part of it where it's a FBI serial killer thriller, which is a fun genre. I'm into that.
Yeah, I do like that genre.
I'm scared of the dark places it might take me from here, but it's cool.
It's going somewhere. I won't spoil anything. But yeah, I'm going to try to lighten the mood. There's no ghost stories and no Longlegs in my pick for this week.
Oh, thank you.
But it is something new that the listeners may not have on their radar because it's an Apple TV Plus show. And unfortunately, Apple TV Plus doesn't seem to advertise very heavily. Like a lot of their stuff seems to come and go without much fanfare, even though it's made quite well and that they get high profile filmmakers and actors in their projects.
Yeah.
It's not season 2 of Pachinko, though I do really want to check that out. But it's the Vince Vaughn crime comedy Bad Monkey. Where he is playing a suspended detective in the Miami Police Department, but he lives in the Keys. He gets caught up in a little bit of a murder mystery. It's got that signature Vince Vaughn humor, the kind of rapid fire, kind of of
Patter.
pitter patter. Yeah, he's got those constantly cracking jokes. It does have some serious scenes as well. But Rob Delaney playing the big bad, which is
that's cool.
really interesting. Always like to see a fellow comedian who made it big from Twitter. Very inspiring for us. But I just saw him in Deadpool and Wolverine, so he's all over the place lately.
Right, yeah.
He's making moves, but really fun cast. It very much scratches that Elmore Leonard itch for me because it's a very Leonardish setup. Disgraced cop in a sunny locale, making jokes and having fun, but also there's serious issues at hand. His books always toe that line very well between serious and humorous. And so far, I'm really enjoying Bad Monkey. I think the first 2 episodes dropped last week, which will be 2 weeks ago when this comes out. And then they dropped episode 3. So it's back to 1 at a time after debuting with 2. And I do think the first 2 episodes were stronger than the third one, but the third one wraps up on a nice big cliffhanger. So I'm still going to stick with it and see where it goes.
Cool. It's nice when a show has actual ups and downs to it, but yet keeps you going along. A lot of shows, a lot of streamers especially, feel like they're padded, where you're like, oh, this episode was stretching out something I really wanted them to get to sooner. But yeah, that sounds like a fun premise and a show that I need to check out.
Yeah, to your point, it's weird because I feel like shows used to be 22, 24 episodes a season, and then they went to like 12, and now they're down to like 6, 7 sometimes, and they still feel like there's padding involved. Maybe it's just they've gotten rid of writers' rooms where you had enough bodies there to make a full season of television now, and they're trying to do it on shoestring budgets. I'm just theorizing.
There's a lot of trends in the industry that are making the writing more challenging.
It's a tough time for Hollywood, but a lot of shows are starting to come back now. Enough time has passed since all the strikes and everything where productions are wrapping up again. I know Yellow Jackets, I think, is still supposed to premiere in 2024.
Oh, okay.
From, which is a show I'm a big fan of on MGM Plus or something.
I remember that.
Yeah, that's coming back middle of September. So there's some good stuff coming soon. But yeah, Bad Monkey is a great little show to bridge the gap for you.
Cool.
Now on to The Green Knight. This is a pretty new one. And I think I mentioned it at the end of last week's episode. I did see this one in theaters.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah, I braved the COVID-riddled streets in 2021. Me and my buddy Steve went, and I feel like I say this every time I talk about going to the movies. We got pretty high, and we were also at one of those movie theaters that serves drinks, so we got a little drunk too. Ooh. And we watched The Green Knight, which was not at all what I was expecting. The trailers for this movie makes it look like much more of an action movie than it is, but I absolutely loved it. I may have even talked about it on this podcast at the time.
Yeah, you might have.
Really enjoyed it and was excited to go back to it this week. Now, what about you? What did you remember about this movie's release, and when did you first check it out?
I remember being excited about it based on knowing very little, because it is a cryptic movie. Like, you don't even know that much more after you watched it. Like, it's a lot of ambiguity in this film. But I remember anticipating it coming to streaming, watching it, liking it. But like I said, it's a little bit disorienting. And so I really found that repeated watches, I've watched it 2 more times this week, I got a lot more out of it. There's a lot more warmth to the movie. Like, you're daunted by the scary things that the hero goes through. He's unprepared. He fails every test on his quest. And you're like, oh, this movie's a bummer. But it has a very warm heart that's a little bit below the surface, or sometimes something that you can't appreciate until you get on its wavelength and some more of that warmth and humanity soaks through, and then it becomes even more enjoyable as a movie.
Yeah, you said it. A lot of ambiguity in this movie, but maybe not as much as you think at first as you kind of dive into it. It does reveal itself more than is immediately apparent upon repeated rewatches. And yeah, it's also just a great movie to look at, which makes rewatches very pleasant. You can look through different lenses. Like, your first rewatch, you're always going to be mainly focused on the story. It's a pretty minimalist story told minimally through dialogue. It's a lot of show, don't tell. But my second rewatch, I was just taking in the scenery, the visuals. So much of this movie is done with practical effects, except, some key scenes. I don't think foxes can really talk like that, but
not that we know of.
And those giants. But when the movie does lean into CGI and visual effects, it's very effectively done for a movie with a $15 million budget. I can't believe how good this movie looks.
It looks fantastic. His style is great. The cinematography is great. And like you said, the storytelling is more straightforward than I remembered it being, at least at first. So there's a bunch of chapters in the middle that are these weird myths that are disorienting because of their weirdness. But the movie starts out and it's just like, oh yeah, I get who this is. It's a medieval failure to launch story, right? It's this knight or this wannabe knight who's too old to still be a wannabe knight. He's fucking around. He's drinking, goofing off. He's avoiding, embracing his responsibility. And then he gets a chance. So he's thrown into the deep end. But it's done in such a spooky, mystical way that you're carried away by the trappings of it. But it's easier to see on the second watch. So like, oh yeah, I totally get this. I get who these people are. I get what the story is.
He is given a chance to make his legend and prove himself. And spoiler alert, he gooses it.
He gooses it real bad.
Almost every step of the way, he gooses it. He's kind of a fail son in a lot of ways.
He is, but one of the strengths of of the movie that's also a challenge to it is because it is ambiguous, it doesn't hit you over the head. You know, in the rom-com version of this movie, when he fucks up, there's sound effects to let you know that he just pooched the test. But here there's not. It's still like, oh, was he supposed to do that? What are the consequences? Is this real? What does that mean? And he asks those questions. Am I really supposed to go on this quest? You said it was a game, but it's not really a game. And you spend a lot of time stewing on those things. And eventually, if you let go and embrace the ambiguity, you get more out of it because you don't get so tied up trying to answer questions that are not totally answerable.
So should we answer the biggest question of all, which is how did this movie come to happen?
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
Our story begins in the late 14th century.
Oh my God, I'm kidding. Can you imagine?
Our story actually begins in November 2018, when it was first announced that David Lowery would write and direct a modern retelling of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a famous 14th century fable. Lowery had one of the more interesting careers for a writer-director in Hollywood, starting with the romance crime drama Ain't Them Bodies Saints, a critical darling that didn't make any money, and went right into animated Disney fare with Pete's Dragon, which was a hit with both audiences and critics. After writing and directing A Ghost Story and The Old Man and the Gun, he tackled his most ambitious project to date, The Green Knight.
Yeah, the Green Knight's hard to tackle. The guy's a literal tree.
Casting the lead role was of utmost importance, as we'd be with the star for virtually the entire movie. As far as we could tell, the only name ever put forward for the role of Gawain was Dev Patel, who was announced in March 2019. Barry Keoghan and Ralph Ineson would join the cast that same month, and in April 2019, Alicia Vikander and Aaron Kellyman joined up. With a $15 million budget secured, filming began in Ireland in March 2019 and wrapped in May 2019, and the film was all set to premiere in March 2020 at South by Southwest, with a full theatrical release coming on May 29th of the same year. For some reason, though, South by Southwest was canceled, and most of the movie theaters in the world closed, and the Green Knight's release was thrown into disarray.
Not the viral sensation they were hoping for.
Some studios decided to release their films as video-on-demand offerings, but Lowery voiced his wishes that the Green Knight would still get a theatrical release. He would eventually get his wish, as in December of 2020 it was announced that the film would be available only in US theaters on July 31st, 2021, because COVID would definitely not be a problem by then. UK cinemas would get a simultaneous theatrical and VOD release on September 24th, 2021, likely damaging the film's overseas box office. Critics loved it, as it sits at 89% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Well done, my brave knight. Now, off with your head.
But audience turnout was less than hoped, as it would pull in only $17 million despite a substantial marketing push. It is widely beloved today, though, and its reputation is likely only to grow stronger over time.
You said something interesting about David Lowery's career is that it looks like absolutely prototypical one for them, one for me. Because he goes from being a director of moody, melancholy indie dramas to fucking straight up Disney children's stuff. It's crazy how different his every other movie is for him.
Yeah, he followed up The Green Knight with a Peter Pan movie for Disney Plus, which was apparently very kid-friendly. So he's one of the only directors, I think, still living that old Hollywood dream of one for them, one for me. But his ones for them and ones for me could not be more different. Although I'm sure he puts the same care and effort into his children's movies, but what range, you know?
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. Doing a little research, I heard him in a couple interviews. But yeah, I checked out a little bit of Pete's Dragon. I watched the first 20 minutes of it just to see. I'm like, is it going to be spooky, melancholy, sad, dark children's movie? And it's not. The opening scene is actually darker than you would think from such a straight-ahead, old-fashioned kids movie about a boy lives with a fuzzy dragon in the woods. But yeah, he's got layers to him. He's not as self-serious as you might imagine a A24 indie director to be. He's like a really good dude and really likable. I watched Ain't Them Bodies Saints too. That's really good.
Not the sequel to Ain't Them Bodies Saints. Ain't Them Bodies Saints also.
That's right. Ain't Them Bodies Saints 2, Saintly Bodies, is still in production. But he's a really interesting guy. Like, he'll say some stuff that you're like, okay, yeah, he's an artist. He's an auteur. Obviously, he's like writing and directing his own projects. He made a Ghost Story kind of like he had some free time and he got a little money to make an indie film on the side without a lot of production effort. But even that is terrifically crafted. But he said something that really stuck with me in one of his interviews when it was in relation to the themes of The Green Knight and what it's about. And he's like, I'm a director. I take this very seriously, but I know know that even my films aren't that lasting. The things that I put out into the world will all crumble and fade away and be unknown in a certain number of years. So he's like, what's more important to me is how I conduct myself in the world. I was like, wow, this is a director who's not consumed with himself and his
legacy.
work and his legacy. He's just like, how do I be a good dude? And that's really exactly what The Green Knight is about. It's like, how do I be a good dude in the world?
Yeah, he even said that's what he wanted people to take away from the very ambiguous ending, is that it doesn't really matter what happens. What matters is that Gawain pursued goodness in his in those last scenes.
Yeah.
Not his final scenes necessarily, but the final scenes of the movie.
Yeah, he figured out what's important in life and what isn't. Really interesting guy. Interesting set of movies. It's kind of a bummer that we're talking about this one because it didn't make him money, because he's definitely a guy that I'm very keen to watch what else he gets to make.
His movies don't make a ton of money in general. Anthem Body Saints cost $4 million. It made $1 million. So we could just as easily be talking about that one. But Pete's Dragon did okay. A Ghost Story seemingly did okay. It cost $100,000 to make and it made $2 million. Now, granted, $2 million is not a ton of money for a movie to make, but when your budget's that low, I think it could be considered a hit. And sadly, even Robert Redford couldn't get him a hit movie, because The Old Man and the Gun, another Casey Affleck movie, also was a bomb with almost the same exact budget and performance as The Green Knight. That one cost $16 million and made $18 million compared to $15 million and $17 million for The Green Knight. He's still working. He's still making movies. Like I said, he did a Peter Pan and Wendy for Disney Plus. So streaming always has opportunities for these auteurs, maybe not to the degree that they would like. But then he's also got another movie coming out called Mother Mary, which is described as an epic melodrama following the relationship of a musician and a fashion designer. So that's a far cry from what we've seen from him so far.
Yeah, that sounds like a whole different direction. Epic melodrama doesn't exactly sound like something I can make sense of, or melodrama is not usually used as a positive term, but it'd be interesting to find out what that means to him. And interestingly, we talked about how much he went back to Casey Affleck, a actor who has some problematic things attached to him, to his image in Hollywood now. I looked at the cast list for Mother Mary. There's not a lot known about the movie. There are 8 actors listed in the cast. None of them are men. There may be 0 men in this movie.
Yeah, just looking over it, FKA Twigs is one of the stars. She's had her own issues with problematic men in Hollywood. You know, she was attached to Shia LaBeouf for a while, and his kind of fall from grace was maybe precipitated by some things she revealed about their relationships. Yeah, as far as I could tell, Lowery didn't work with Affleck after any of that controversy broke. He seems to at least be mindful of that type of thing and trying to do his best to alleviate that patriarchal influence in Hollywood to the best of his abilities as a white guy.
Yeah, it's early for us to speculate whether this next movie is specifically treating on those themes, but definitely could be based on the evidence that we can see.
Yeah, you're right. I'm looking at the cast list now. 0 men in the cast, which is interesting for sure.
It'll be fun to see what happens.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the story of The Green Knight, not the myth, the movie?
Let me open these parchment pages and begin to read.
Can you do it in the voice of the intro?
You mean like a spooky, raspy sound design thing?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe. Let's see what happens in post-production. Gawain, played by Dev Patel, is an aspiring knight in the court of his uncle, the legendary King Arthur, played by Sean Harris. But he's kind of a fuck-up who mostly gets drunk and spends time in houses of ill repute with his girlfriend, a commoner named Essel, played by Alicia Vikander. One fateful Christmas morning, Gawain's mother, Morgan Le Fay, played by Sarita Choudhury, who is also the king's sister, sends her son off to court with an excuse for why she's not coming. Instead, she stays behind and casts a magic spell, which leads to the appearance of the Green Knight, played by Ralph Ineson, a fearsome, hulking tree man who challenges the men of the Round Table to a game. One of the brave knights may try to strike a blow on the Green Knight and receive his mighty axe as a reward, but 1 year later, they must venture to his green chapel and submit to receiving an equal strike in return. Gawain answers the challenge, and when the Green Knight kneels and offers his neck, Gawain goes whole hog and chops his head clean off. Then the Green Knight picks his head up and gallops off with it, reminding Gawain of their bargain, due 1 year hence. The year passes, and Gawain is contemplating whether or not to see the game through. Essel says don't do it. She thinks it's silly and proposes he stay and marry her instead. But Gawain is cold to her. Meanwhile, Arthur is kind of like, yeah, you need to see this through. You gotta face death and maybe become great. So Morgan prepares her son for the journey by giving him a magical green sash, which she says will protect him from all bodily harm. So a week before Christmas, Gawain sets out alone on his horse to fulfill the expectations upon him and perhaps to earn honor and achieve greatness.
Quite a setup, a lot happening in that first act.
Yeah.
But like you said, the beginning of this movie is very much, outside of the spooky spoken word intro, is very much, like you said, a young man fucking up and basically being a fail son.
And it dawns on you that he's not just a fail son, but pretty important family. He's the king's nephew. The king goes out of his way to show some kindness towards him, which Sean Harris's Arthur pulls off.
In his own creepy way.
A mixture of creepiness and warmth that is like, it's beautiful. I love that casting. He's ominous, but he's also friendly and loving. He's like really powerful, but he's also sick and incredibly weak. The characters as they're written are really interesting and then performed beautifully by Sean Harris as Arthur and Kate Dickie as Guinevere.
Yeah, we were talking off night. Poor Kate Dickie. I feel half the roles we see her in, she's made to look just ill.
She looks bad. I'm sorry.
She's rough in this one. Game of Thrones, of course, she was Lysa Arryn. They went out of their way to make her look sickly in that. And then The Witch.
That's true.
Which everyone kind of looked sickly in The Witch, except for Black Phillip. But it gives the impression of a crumbling empire.
Yeah.
That maybe the best days of this kingdom are behind it. But Sean Harris, so good. We're both Harris heads. Maybe not to the same degree we're edgelords, but we'll get into that later. They reunite. They actually don't reunite them, but the movie contains our boys from The Stranger, the movie we keep talking about and forgetting existed.
Yeah, we keep bringing it up and then going, what was that? What was the name of that movie? And what are the names of the guys in it? Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris. I think I've got them locked in the brain now, but yeah, they're both very good in this movie and they don't get to talk, but they're still great.
Or maybe they don't get to talk. There are some theories. Mayhaps they do.
The identity of various characters is pretty unclear.
There might be some robots in disguise, so to speak. We'll bring that up as it comes. So let's talk about, you had a note here about Lowery's signatures as a filmmaker, which are all present here. How would you describe them?
Yeah, it was all the stuff that I really picked up on, starting with A Ghost Story. His stuff is moody. There's long stretches where it's quiet. There's not that much dialogue. He lingers on shots for too long. Now, because A Ghost Story is an indie and he doesn't have to give a shit, he lingers on shots for like minutes longer than you think he should cut away in that movie. This one, it's like, okay, there's some slow shots, but they're not crazy. They don't make you wonder if something went wrong with the edit, but he loves that stuff. And it's actually like a quote from him addressing that. He says he likes the idea of a shot lasting so long that your mind drifts off and goes to something in your own life. And you come back to the film and go, oh, the shot's still going on, but you've brought something from your own experience to his movie, which is really interesting. Is a very generous thing, again, like antithetical to the narcissistic persona of the auteur director. But it's really interesting to see him play with that and just how long he can hold on a shot.
Yeah, he gets to do some of that in this movie, but not to the degree, like you mentioned, he does when he really doesn't have to answer to anyone. They still did want to make money with this movie at some point.
Yeah.
So he had to pull it back a little bit. But when he does get to do it, it's very effective because the sets, the scenery is so striking in this movie that the longer you get to look at it, the happier you are.
It's really neat to look at. It's really neat to listen to. The score by Daniel Hart, who's his constant collaborator on music, is really jarring and eerie and beautiful and interesting. And the one hint that I noticed that I think you get that his personality is not all dark and moody is that there's these fun chapter titles that are overlays for each part of the movie. There's the opening, but then the movie is kind of organized in chapters. And they're just cute with medieval writing and they're slightly whimsical. Did you feel that way? Like they brighten the mood?
They do. It could be a dreary kind of downer of a movie in the wrong hands, but Lowery knows enough to pull back just a little bit on that vibe. And there are joyful moments in the movie. A lot of them in this early scene. There are long stretches of pretty dark stuff too.
It gets heavy. And then he's like, but you know what? It's okay to just treat it as a fun kind of fairy tale. And that's what, to me, what the fun fonts on screen told me.
And I think we both agree that one of the things that keeps the movie from feeling too self-serious and too dreary is Dev Patel as Gawain.
Yeah.
He is really a welcome presence in this movie. It's hard for me to imagine anyone else doing the role. And I guess David Lowery is the same because there's no casting rumors about, well, they wanted this guy and they couldn't get him. So they had to settle for Dev Patel. It seems like that was his choice from day one.
He's such a cool actor. Like I always thought he was good. He definitely has just a great likability to him. I think I saw him in Lion was the first thing, which was a great performance. But I was not as interested in that story as here. This is like, whoa, he gets to do something that I think is cool, which is Arthurian legend. And he brings his just awesome humanity to it. Like it warms up the movie so much. And the movie is so full of cold mists and gloomy forests. And like, oh, thank goodness we're with Dev Patel.
Yeah. Did he have to try to make Ireland look that gloomy or is that just how it is? I've never been.
Yeah, it looks fucking cold, man.
It looks cold and gray. To add to what you were saying, I first remember Dev Patel from the much maligned Newsroom Room, the Aaron Sorkin HBO show.
Oh.
He was a main cast member of that show as
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, as Neil Sampat. And he started as a relatively small part, but I think the filmmakers knew they had something and he became the focal point of the third and final season of the show, aside from Jeff Daniels, because he was the star. But they really tried to center Dev Patel in the third season, and it's one of the better ones for it.
Cool.
And I was immediately a fan. His casting is inspired here. Even just to have like a non-Caucasian family be so central to the story in here is an interesting and inspired choice.
Yeah, it's part of the subtext of the movie, but it's very subtle. But there are scenes that seem to comment on it. You know, he gets his portrait done and he's whitewashed in his official portrait and also maybe in his unofficial puppet show version of himself. But it's interesting how his family fits in. His mother's played by Sarita Choudhury. Also doesn't get a ton to say, but she brings so much gravitas to just her face on screen is awesome. You love her in this.
Yeah, she brings a lot of quiet authority. I almost got like a Bene Gesserit vibe from her in this movie.
Yeah.
But it's a really just lots of unique and inspired choices throughout. But
for sure,
let's talk about the big challenge, because there's a lot of ways to read this.
Yeah.
The Green Knight shows up, clearly summoned by Morgan in some manner. But the trailers to this movie make it seem like he's throwing down the gauntlet, like he's antagonistic and really ready to fight. He comes off a little more jovial, even when laying down the challenge, than I remembered on rewatch. He's got like a warmth to him, not to the same degree he does at the end of the movie. He's a little threatening because you need him to be. But what was your take on him when he first appeared? Did you think this is a serious guy who's going to fuck shit up, or?
Yeah, he's so cool looking and spooky and intimidating, which is exactly like, that's the test, right? The whole test is, it's a test of your knightly masculinity, is how do you react to somebody who looks really scary, but actually if you listen to him, is not that threatening. One of the things that I picked out at the end of he's describing the rules of his game is, oh yeah, then you have to come and I return the blow. And if you do that, we'll be friends, we'll be buds. Like he basically says, then I will be your fun, cool friend if you do that. So I may be mangling the line of dialogue there, but
I don't think he says, I'll be your fun, cool friend.
But he ends on this warm note.
That's the vibe.
And that's the whole thing is like,
it's like we'll part in friendship or something like that.
Yeah, like he's not just offering you can get the reward and I won't kill you. He's like, I won't kill you and I will be your friend. So it's not that scary thing. And it's really hard to read what Arthur thinks. Like you're in Gawain's position trying to figure out, Arthur's like, do you understand this game? And he's like, I think so. I don't know. Like no one's helping him. The Knights of the Round Table are all there and they're not saying shit. They're just looking. No one comes forward.
Arthur could have been like, just give him a little cut on the arm and then, and you get a cool axe.
He's in on the test. He's like, all right, do your thing. How do you respond to this challenge? And it's funny because the Green Knight is goading him by being more and more submissive. Like he doesn't draw his axe and then strike a fighting pose. He draws his axe and then he sets it down and then he kneels down and then he gives his neck and Gawain's like, what do I do? This guy's being so nice. I have to fuck him up. And he's like, no, I don't think that's how you're supposed to react to that.
Yeah, he gooses it. He cuts his head right off. And the Knights of the Round Table cheer, but it's pretty clear in Arthur's body language and also Morgan, who is somehow observing from afar, that was not what they were hoping.
Yeah.
Gawain would
They give him one little reaction shot where they're like, ooh, buddy, now you did it.
Because then, of course, the Green Knight stands up, picks his head up and goes, all right, buddy, I'll see you in a year.
And he laughs. He laughs his way out of there. Very much Headless Horseman vibes, which is pretty fun.
And we should call out, he is not a creation of CGI or special effects. That is a practical effect that made the Green Knight.
Yeah.
And it lends such a important physicality to the character. He is truly there, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's Ralph Ineson wearing just really bitchin' prosthetics and makeup. And he's a tall dude, but so is Dev. So they had to have Ralph stand on an apple box at times just for the shots to make him always look tall and intimidating. But he does. It's so cool. Even the close-up, he looks really good. And it's just like, that's fun for fantasy fans. The movie is delivering some really juicy genre satisfaction right there.
Once again, I'm compelled to point out $15 million budget. I can't believe.
I know.
Like in some other movies, they would spend $15 million on the Green Knight, just the character. And here he looks fucking fantastic. You described him as warm but stern, which I think is the best way. You know, he's going to stick to the rules of the game, but he's not threatening, which throws Gawain's decision to chop his head off into question. I've seen some speculation that the Green Knight's whole mysticism is meant to evoke the paganism that King Arthur was working to kind of rid England of and or his kingdom of. That might explain why Gawain feels like I should kill this guy for Arthur. But I don't know that the movie's running with that theme because Morgan is overtly pagan in her.
Yeah,
you know.
It does seem to be playing with Christianity versus paganism, also in similar terms like nature versus civilization, which is, I think, one of the core symbols that the Green Knight represents is like he represents nature, and the lady character in the middle of the movie kind of says as much, that you can't resist the force of nature. It's either going to grow over you or you're going to die and it's going to consume you with decay, and all that stuff is green. And yeah, there's a lot of these themes running throughout. None of them is so explicit that you feel like you have to stop and solve the riddle and answer the question. They're just there.
Yeah, the movie absolutely works on its own terms without any subtext. It's a very straightforward story. And it takes a lot of liberties from the original poem, but still keeps the spirit of it. But there's plenty of subtext there to dive into if you're so inclined. And I think the movie rewards you for it.
Yeah, makes it really fun. You can geek out. This is a movie both because it's recent and because it's so rich with symbolism and subtext. There's so much to read and watch when you like want to dig into this movie. You can't even consume all the articles and YouTube video essays and stuff. It's just, it's pure bait for like YouTubers who make video essays about cinema. So there's a million of them and some of them are good. And
there's so many about the Green Knight. Yeah, some of them I was watching, and maybe it's my own confidence as a observer of film, but I was like, no, like half the time, like,
yeah,
you're fucking wrong to some of these guys.
YouTube is a Wild West that way, and the quality of opinions varies, but it's still fun. Like if you're inclined to be that kind of a fan of movies and want to get into that discussion, there's a lot to be had, and that does deepen what you can get out of it.
I think we should talk a little bit about Essel before we move on to the second act.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very important character who we will see again, but we kind of say goodbye to her in this section in a pretty sad way.
Yeah, I'd seen her in some other things before this. I guess Ex Machina was several years before this, although I didn't see that right away. But I'm like, oh yeah, I like her. And then I saw her in this, especially this second set of viewings this week. I was like, oh my God, she's a better actor than I ever gave her credit for. The scene where she jokingly proposes to her boyfriend, knowing that it's a long shot because she's common born, he's the king's nephew. The emotions that she plays on her face in this scene that's entirely in close-up are so powerful. I was like, holy shit, that was like one of the best romance scenes that I can think of. She jokes her way through it, but her vulnerability as she realizes that he's rejecting her, she's like, oh, well, maybe we could get married and I could be your lady and have your ear. And it's heartbreaking because he like doesn't say anything. And you're like, dude, you're fucking up. Look at this woman. You got a good one here. And you're just pooching it. Maybe worse than chopping off the Green Knight's head was him not responding to Essel's proposal.
And she says something during that speech about this is how silly men get killed. And then he says, or how good men become great. And she goes, why is goodness not enough? Why do you have to be great? And
she's wise too.
Yeah, based on what Lowery has said about himself and this movie, that seems to be maybe the thesis statement.
Be good.
Why is goodness not enough?
Yeah. Focusing on great leads to making all these mistakes and bad choices. Let's try to be good.
And boy, does he make a few. Do you want me to talk about some of them?
Yeah, let's get into the meat where he gets a lot of challenges and fails them all.
The second act is just a comedy of errors. All right. Gawain rides through a desolate field, still littered with corpses from a recent battle. There he meets a scavenger played by Barry Keoghan, who tells Gawain that to find the Green Chapel, he should head into the nearby forest and ask for some reward for the tip. Looks like he was going that way anyway, but whatever. Gawain gives him a single coin, then rides into the forest where the scavenger and his mates rob him of all his valuable gear and leave him tied up to die. But Gawain finds the strength to break free and continue on his journey. Next, he comes to an empty house where he meets the ghost of a young woman named Winifred. Winifred tells Gawain how her murderer threw her head in the nearby pond and asks him to retrieve it so she can rest in peace. He does, but not before pissing her off by asking for something in exchange for himself. He's nevertheless rewarded anyway, in that he finds the Green Knight's axe which was stolen from him. Cold, tired, and hungry, Gawain takes shelter in a cave where he befriends a little red fox that's been following him. The next night, Gawain eats some mushrooms he finds, which sends him on a psychedelic trip. In the morning, Gawain sees a troop of giants making their way across the nearby valley and asks them to give him a ride. But the fox jumps between them, snarling and howling, driving the giants away. Then Gawain is taken in by the lord and lady of a luxurious castle. The lord, played by our boy Joel Edgerton, insists that Gawain should stay, rest, and enjoy their hospitality until Christmas morning, when he can leave for the nearby Green Chapel and complete his quest. So he stays, but he's uncomfortable with the increasing romantic advances of the lady, who happens to look exactly like his girlfriend Essel back home. The lady seduces Gawain, then scolds him when he succumbs to her. But nevertheless, she gives him a magical green sash of protection, just like the one that was stolen from him. Gawain is upset and abruptly parts ways with the Lord and Lady a bit early to resume his quest for the Green Chapel. I did want to point out, I believe the Green Knight says in his scene at the Round Table that it's only a 6-day ride to his chapel. Is that right?
Yeah, it
Boy,
seems like longer.
It seems like longer, doesn't it?
There's how many episodes? There's like chapters. It's definitely a chaptery movie, and it probably adds up.
But he gets to the castle on the 21st of December, I would think they say.
Okay.
So, and that's why he's convinced to stay longer. So that means it took him 1 day to get to the castle, 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Which I guess it could add up. But boy, what an eventful week he's had.
What a week, man. Starting off, the first guy he meets is Barry Keoghan's scavenger.
He's sort of an evil parson.
He's sort of that kind of person. Although you didn't know it, he seems like a funny, goofy kid.
I don't know. Barry Keoghan always just comes off as a little menacing to me, even when he's trying to be jovial. There's like an unpredictability to him that even when I saw this movie in theaters and I didn't really have any concept of who Barry Keoghan was or the types of weird little freaks he usually plays, I was like, this is a weird little freak.
No, you're right. He is a weird freak. He's doing weird stuff. He's saying a lot of weird contradictory stuff. He's in a chipper mood, but he's talking about searching for the dead bodies of his brothers. And he's like kind of chucking arrows he found like he's a little kid, but he's talking about a bunch of serious stuff.
Yeah, he seems vaguely threatening to Gawain, even when they're maintaining this air of civility. He says something like, "You do any fighting with that axe?"
Yeah.
And Gawain says, "Here and there." And he goes, "Here?" Like almost, it feels almost like a challenge. But then Gawain says, "Just there." Aside from being like a fun little bit of dialogue, I was like, it couldn't shake the feeling of, have you ever been at out at a bar or something and there's just like a drunk guy that you're talking to and it's friendly, but you're like, I feel like this could go wrong at any moment. That's the vibe I very much got from the scavenger.
He's great at that. And it obviously it comes true.
Tweren't enough.
He sends him to the forest and they horse jack him, or I don't know, what do you call that? But
don't talk about horsejacking.
He proves,
not that kind of podcast.
Besides Gawain kind of being a jerk because he doesn't at first want to even offer the kid anything. And then he proves, as people keep telling him, he's no knight. You were waiting for your hero who puts on chainmail and a beautiful amber cloak. He looks pretty badass. So, okay, now our hero's going to be cool and show that he's good with a sword. And he has no fighting skills. He's nothing. He
gets his ass beat by these 3 starving peasants.
Yeah, this little woman and this little weirdo Barry Keoghan just totally roll him and leave him to die. Like he's tied up. And that's where Lowery puts in one of his Loweryisms, this achingly slow 360-degree pan from Gawain lying there tied up all the way around the forest and back to him. And you're like, oh, the hero died.
Yeah, he's just a skeleton at that point, completely decayed. But it only becomes clear a little later on because this is the first test he faces on his journey. So you don't really understand what the movie's doing, but he's facing the 5 knightly virtues and failing them all. And this is generosity. He's helped in quotes, because like I said, when I was doing the synopsis, pretty sure he was going that way anyway. I don't know how much help old Barry actually gave him, but he's given help unsolicited, but still he offers no reward in return. And one of the 5 knightly virtues is generosity. And the others are, I believe, chastity, chivalry, piety, friendship.
That sounds about right. And that's another one of those themes that's there throughout the film that's supposedly represented for the knights by the 5-pointed star, of which Arthur wears a medallion. It's on the floor in the middle of the round table. It's evoked by Guinevere in a speech about the 5 this and the 5 that. I think it was Guinevere. There's a lot of these allusions to it. But also, if you don't know that, it also works because you can just see that the guy's fucking up. He's just not being a great guy at every turn.
Yeah. In a brutal scene where he has to cut himself out with his prone sword and cuts himself pretty painfully. He gets out and then continues on the road and he comes to Winifred's house. And I wonder if he'll face a test there that he'll fail.
That was cool and spooky. That's where the movie is most like a horror movie because it's full on ghost story stuff. Like he goes into this house, he picks up the piece of bread. It's clearly desiccated for years. It's not edible. And then he meets a real life ghost.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the same actress that plays his wife in the telling of what his life could have been like if he flees the Green Knight, right?
I had that exact same thought and I looked it up and it's not.
Wow, they look very similar.
They have a similar aspect to them. They're both redheaded and freckled and beautiful young ladies. What's the name? The actress who plays Winifred is more well known. She was in
Erin Kellerman.
Solo movie. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. She was in Solo. So she's been on the pod before. She plays what was that stupid group called? The terrorists that ended up being the good guys.
Yeah. Erin Kellerman plays Enfys Nest.
Enfys Nest. That's right. Oh, and she was also in Willow, the TV show on Disney Plus.
Okay.
Which feels like a spiritual pairing with this movie.
Oh, yeah. So Lowery mentions that Willow and what's that other movie? There's some 80s, 90s fantasy movies that were big inspirations for him wanting to do a fantasy himself.
Merlin, I think he referenced, which was like a TV movie in the 90s,
okay.
which has one of my favorite scenes in a movie ever for a bad reason. Somebody throws a hatchet at another guy, but like it doesn't spin. Like they throw it and it just like moves across the screen and not like in a magical way, just in like this is really cheesy way. Speaking of which, Erin Kellyman, she's going to be in 28 Years Later, which I'm very excited for. Danny Boyle's back in the chair for that one.
Wow. Fun.
And her boy Killian is going to be back as Jim. She's a very winning actor. I really enjoyed her performance here. I would dive into a lake to get her head. She seems nice.
It's tough. It's scary. It's kind of a pond, but it's kind of a metaphysical place because as soon as he goes under the water, it turns all red and there's a star field in there. And
yeah, he almost drowns. The star field has to wake him up, but then he gets his axe back. So he must have done something right. But yeah, he does ask her for what am I going to get basically if I do that?
Yeah.
And she's like, what's wrong with you, man? That's not how knights behave.
How would you ever ask me that? She really like chews him out. But yeah, he stumbles out of there. And he's just getting progressively more hungry and tired and cold.
Yeah, he can't stay too long in that house because, like we mentioned, there's no food. He gets a bed for the night and that's about it. And then he starts tripping. But the fox sticks with him. So the fox is not a figment of his imagination. But these giants are... I hope.
It's a good question, right? Because on the repeat watch, I checked the timeline. I was like, oh, the mushrooms lead directly to the giants. And they do, but it's the next morning. Like he has one vision immediately after eating these mushrooms. First, he hallucinates about some weird stuff crawling over his hand, growing onto his hand. And then he sees the Green Knight. And that's kind of like that vision breaks him out of his despair. And it's like you see the Green Knight and it renews his energy to search him down.
Yeah.
But then the next morning, he's kind of stumbly. The camera's doing a little bit of wiggling and wobbling back and forth. And then he sees these giants in the mist who are totally spooky and weird, like bald child ladies.
Yeah, they reminded me of the engineers from Prometheus a little bit. But
they're bald and white and smooth, except they've got some crust. They've got like moss growing on them because they're just so big and slow moving.
The fox seems quite wary of them, but also maybe he's just trying to stop Gawain from accidentally stepping off a cliff.
Yeah, if they're not there, then he's, hey, get back here. If they are real, they're probably hazardous, and maybe they represent him taking a shortcut because he's like, that valley looks really far. Can I just hitch a ride with you guys who are stepping across it pretty easily? The fox is like, no way, dude, back off. And so he backs off, and then the camera does a 360 twirl, and the giants disappear into the mist, and you're like, were they ever there? Who knows? Who knows?
But very cool visual. I remember it from the trailer. It was one of the things that made me want to go see this movie.
For sure.
I was like, that looks awesome. And they are awesome in the movie. But yeah, their reality is ambiguous to some extent.
Yeah.
But then we get to one part that is not ambiguous, and that is the castle. The castle's really there. Is Joel wearing a bear hat when Gawain arrives? Who can say? But I think so.
That threw me a little bit. Yeah, he's silhouetted up the stairs. And he's like, welcome. And you're like, that's a fucking bear, man. But it's not. It's just a dude who likes hunting.
I had a Midsommar flashback in that scene, but
totally.
It's our boy Joel, the edgelord himself. I loved seeing him in this because he's playing a very different character than we've gotten to see from him in the last few years.
Yeah, even though he's ominous in the way he shows up and you're prepared for everything to be a spooky trap at this point, he conveys a lot of joy. He's a warm guy. He's doing nothing but telling Gawain to relax and chill out, eat some food, rest, enjoy his beautiful castle. And he's a jolly guy. And I feel like Edgerton, at least the roles that I think of him from, they're like really dark, sad people going through hard stuff.
Damaged.
And I'm like, I love to see him with joy in his eyes, and he conveys that beautifully. It's a great performance.
He is great in this. I mean, I might be biased because I fucking love Joel, but you do get the sense that he knows more than he's saying, but you never get the sense that he's trying to lead Gawain astray or confuse him in any way. Like, he does shit on his whole idea about this quest. He's like, so you do this one thing, that's it, and then you're great suddenly. And he seems incredulous, but not like in a mean way, more just in like, why don't you think about it a little harder? And spoiler alert, in the original poem, or I don't know if it actually was a poem, but the original tale, he is also the Green Knight.
Which would have been weird in the way that those old legends are. They're all just like kind of a little bit too weird to really swallow. I like how Lowery ironed it out in this version where he's just a guy who happens to live close to the Green Knight, which is maybe part of his weirdness. He lives in a castle where even he can't explain everything that goes on there, but he's his own guy. He's
got a creepy blind lady in his castle. Do they ever say who she is to him? Is that his mother-in-law or his mother?
They don't. She never says a word. They don't even acknowledge that she's sitting across the breakfast table from him. And like, who's the mute old lady with a bandage over her eyes? But the bandage over the eyes certainly evokes his mother, Morgan, Gawain's mother, because she was seen wearing the same kind of thing. I have a fan theory that she's the representation of Morgan in this place, and she may be actually pulling the strings. Perhaps even you could go so far as to say that the lady, who's a somewhat surreal character because she is literally identical to Essel.
Yeah, she's just Essel with a new haircut and some fancier clothes.
Different accent. Essel has a northern accent that makes her read as a commoner, and the lady has a more upper class accent, posh accent. Yeah. But yeah, like I was like, maybe the lady isn't even real. Maybe the lady is a puppet that his mom created and is puppeting, and that's why she's standing in the background really creepily all the time in the guise of this old silver-haired lady.
This never occurred to me, but when I was reading your notes, I was like, that actually is a solid theory that I now subscribe to, but it does make the sash hand job a little creepier in retrospect because it's basically his mom jerking him off.
Yeah. Is she even touching him though? So this whole chapter climaxes, forgive the double entendre, with the seduction scene. And if you don't watch it closely, you're like, oh, they didn't want to show a real sex scene, but they had sex. Like she's kind of on top of him and grinding on him at least. But the thing that's exchanged is the green sash, right? Like the act that they had, it ends with him splooging on it, which is a shocking image because they show a soiled sash moments after. But
you don't see jizz in Hollywood very often. It's a rare thing.
It's a powerful choice by a director. I gotta say that's a bold one. But like, she doesn't take her fur cloak off. The act that consummates that thing is she's like, do you want it? Do you want it? And she's talking about the sash, and like him reaching for the sash and pulling it off her waist is the climax of that scene. So it's like, there wasn't really a sex act. It's more like his sin was breaking his chastity, right? He was seduced by her as a woman, but he was also seduced by the offering of invulnerability, right? He went back to the sash that protects him from harm so he could put off dealing with the fact that life is real and danger is real and, you should act accordingly. Live your life. Don't just get drunk in a bar every night. And so maybe that's like another version of the message that chapter represents.
For sure. I think the sash represents a false safety to him, a defiance of death, which is antithetical to Lowery's idea of what a good person should do and be. So his clinging to it, yeah, it's a failure of chastity, but it's also just a failure of character to need his blankie.
I wanted to call out one other thing that I love about this section and his scenes with the lady where she's sort of coming on to him romantically. She's given him this heart-shaped book full of love poems. She's doing a portrait of him in which she just invented photography in the Middle Ages, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, good for her. Ladies in STEM.
Yeah, she is a philosopher, a scientist. She talks about how she's very well read, but she gives in what I thought was the more important sort of romantic betrayal and hit home to me because I had fallen in love with Essel in that earlier scene. She finds Essel's bell, which was her little token that Gawain had around his neck. She goes, oh, is this a token of love? And he says, no. And to me, that was like, oh, bro, that is so harsh that you just dissed Essel again by saying, oh, no, I don't know about love. This bell is nothing.
And he doesn't pick up on the fact this woman looks exactly like Essel. Or maybe
maybe it's a test, dude.
The bell is kind of a funny token. Was he a cat? He's wearing a little bell around his neck. It looks like the kind of bell you would give a pet.
It's a funny little thing, but it's great in terms of filmmaking to be able to symbolize a relationship with a little object that you carry. That is excellent filmmaking technique. And it says so much when he says, no, I don't know what that bell is. It's nothing to me. And it's like, oh, that's fucked up, man.
Yeah, but you also don't believe him because why else would he still be wearing it?
Yeah, he's definitely torn about it.
He's in denial.
Yeah.
Hart, you want to take us through to the end?
All right, here we go. Back in the forest, and now rapidly approaching the Green Chapel, Gawain is confronted by his traveling companion, the fox. The creature now speaks with a human voice and tries to convince Gawain to abandon the quest and not to put his life into the hands of the Green Knight. But he's determined. Gawain finds the chapel and kneels before the knight, but at the last moment, he changes his mind. He flees, so we see Gawain returning home and succeeding Arthur as the new king. But his life plays out with increasing gloom as he chooses to abandon Essel in order to take a noble-born bride. And his life is consumed with the darkness of perpetual war that takes the life of his son and alienates him from his family. But suddenly, Gawain finds himself still kneeling in the Green Chapel. His bleak future was merely a vision of what could come. With newfound insight into life and his own values, Gawain removes the magic sash that protects him from physical harm, and he truly submits to receiving the axe blow which the Green Knight owes him. And then, in a genuinely friendly voice, the Green Knight tells him, well done, my brave knight. Now, off with your head.
As he does like a little playful throat slash gesture with his finger.
Yeah, obviously the biggest unresolved question of this movie is, does his head come off? Movie cuts to the end title before we see what happens. And it's fun to think about and talk about. And it's not necessarily intended to be like, oh, did you solve it one way or the other?
It's it is unsolvable, but you
Yeah.
can draw your own conclusions.
Kind of like the ending to The Thing, which we covered once upon a time. You're like, it's fun to live in that ambiguity. But for me, if you would have said now off with your head and then done the little gentle throat scratch move, then you're like, oh, he did it symbolically and he returned the blow with a gentle scratch and he's cool. But he does a scratch first and finishes it and then goes off with your head. And, oh, wait, it's still coming? I thought that was it.
Now, what if it's like a grammatical joke where he's like, now off with your head?
Oh, yes. It's a different line reading.
Different line reading. Just put the emphasis on a different word. But no, I think, again, it's unknowable. I'm just of the opinion, based on Lowery's kind of humanistic view of the movie, that he does live when he takes the sash off and resigns himself to whatever fate awaits him with the Green Knight. He's passed the ultimate test and would be allowed to live. I know in the original story he does live, but there's so many diversions from the original story that I don't even think you can take that as any kind of indication here.
Yeah, I like that interpretation. I do feel like he allowed his ego to die. His fear of facing the world is now dead, which allows him to live freely and honorably.
That flash forward fake out is so well done.
Yeah.
And so crushing when he takes the baby from Essel and leaves just like a sack of coins on her bed and she's crawling after. It's so fucked up.
That's two movies with a pleading, crying, crawling person on the ground. Michael Clark Duncan did it in The Island and Alicia Vikander does it here. And it's really, it's gut-wrenching. That's where Lowery, I think, that's a tour de force of what he can really do. It's 15 minutes, that whole flash forward. It's a long sequence. There is no dialogue.
Words.
No words at all. And yet you don't notice that. You think you're hearing words because the story is so strongly told. Every scene, every shot is telling you something, advancing the story, but it just doesn't need words. And this guy's really good. It's so engrossing that I believed that was really happening. I had forgotten how the movie ended since my initial watch. And I'm like, oh, this is a dark ending. Everything goes bad for him. And then I'm like, oh, it was all a dream. It's funny at that moment to realize you've been tricked.
I had to go back and check the timestamps to even accept the fact that it's 15 minutes because it does not feel that long. This movie in general is longer than 2 hours, but it's like a breezy movie. It flies by when you're watching it. Maybe it's the chapters help break it up, feel like distinct scenes from each other. But I don't know. It's just for a movie that could be criticized as being like overly contemplative, it does not feel overly long to me.
No, it's all worth it. And it is slow and deliberate in its moves at points, but there's so much to get into. And again, especially in this end section, the Green Chapel has some of the most gorgeous cinematography. Some of the shots of Gawain standing in the archway, of the Green Knight resting in his little cove there, whatever you call that. It's just gorgeous. So yeah, besides the way that the chapters move you, the visuals are engrossing the whole time.
Yeah, and you called it out here in your notes, and I should remark upon it as well, that we see the Green Knight's face change several times while he's waking up. He looks like Arthur, he looks like Morgan, he looks like the Lord and the Lady. Does he look like Gawain himself at any point? I think so, right?
I think at the end he does. It's the point where Gawain is spending the night in the chapel waiting for Christmas morning for the Green Knight to wake up, and this light is reflecting off water or something, so it's twinkling blue light on his face. And like, I noticed a couple faces the first time, and then I read or saw some people talking about it, and they're like, actually, there's more in there. You can see this person, you can see that person. And eventually people point out the whole cast is in there. The Green Knight is everybody, which is maybe part of the message. But then something that struck me about how well done it is, I went back to try to see everybody, and I couldn't. I could actually see fewer people as I rewatched it and rewound it each time. It's a really striking little effect and a really fun part of the movie.
You had a theory here about the fox that I wanted to give you some time to...
The fox is special, and it's obviously guiding him on his journey. And you know from the start that his mom set this whole thing in motion. If she didn't create the Green Knight, she at least gave him his script that he read at the round table. So you're like, oh, is that the mom? Or is that a familiar of her as she's some kind of witch?
She's definitely some kind of witch.
Yeah. So then the fox finally talks and says, don't do it. A message that's hard to understand if that is his mom, because like she set this whole thing up because she really wanted to shake her son out of his mode he was in, to teach him some lessons about life, to make him equal to the task of inheriting the throne, which he was probably going to do. Like that all makes sense. But the fox tells him, fuck it, don't go to the Green Knight. That's stupid. You can pretty much go home and tell everybody you did, and no one's going to know the difference, and you'll be fine. So she's giving him like bad advice, and he's actually in the right for a moment saying, get out of here, I got to do this thing. But the last statement, the voice changes from like a creepy voice that you can't tell what it is to a more smooth woman's voice. I'm like, was that Sarita Choudhury's voice? who is this fox? And there's another one of those questions that we maybe can't know, but it's certainly part of the interesting stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that she would legitimately want him to flee at that point after coming this far. And like you said, she, to some degree, orchestrated the entire scenario.
So was she applying the final test? Was she like trying to tempt him into making the wrong choice again, and he actually passed her test that time? Maybe?
That's I feel like that whole ending sequence is him coming to terms with this fate. And that is truly the test. So that could just be a wrinkle in it. But it's not like he could still turn around there. It's not like the Green Knight chases him when he flees the chapel.
Yeah.
So it really is not like the point of no return or anything. It's interesting. But if we're interpreting it that the fox is either his mom in disguise or an instrument of his mom, then I'm of the opinion that she was just laying a final almost trap to try to get him to flee.
Yeah.
But it would be another mistake.
And then in his head, he falls into that trap because that's the trap of the whole flashback sequence. He has to see it play out for him to really know what he's facing and then make the right decision in the end.
And that's The Green Knight. What a movie. I'm sad. Every time it's over, I get sad. I'm like, I want to keep watching it.
Yeah, that was a good movie. We were both telling each other this week as we watched it and rewatched it, like it kept growing on us and growing. And we're like, oh, we love this movie.
I'm probably going to watch it again within the next month just because we need good movies in this world. There's not a lot of movies coming out that I'm excited about right now. So rather than watch YouTube videos, I'd rather watch a good movie.
That's smart.
There's we kind of stepped on our own dick, pardon the expression.
Gowan style.
Yeah, we gowaned it. We already went over Lowery's whole career as we were going through the movie.
That's true.
And he wrote and directed the movie, so there's really no other cast to speak of. But just to add another layer to the Mother Mary situation, filming on that wrapped about a month ago.
Oh, neat.
So you'd guess 6 to 7 months probably before we see the finished product, which would put us in like late winter 2025 or early spring. I can't imagine it's a very special effects intensive one though, so it could be sooner. Maybe it'll do the festival rounds, who knows?
Yeah, it seems like he has a chance to get it out for Oscar season, so he might be in the running next year.
Very excited to see where his career goes. I was a little alarmed when I was researching for this movie that he almost quit filmmaking before he made The Green Knight. And I was like, that would have been a great loss for
seriously
American cinema. It's not a great time to get into filmmaking in general. The industry's shrinking. It's becoming harder to get stuff made, secure budgets, get your movies released. Sometimes you'll make a movie and they'll just throw it in the garbage when it's done to save some tax money. So we need passionate and thoughtful filmmakers.
I don't know what was driving him. Obviously, it must have been something intensely personal and difficult because here's a guy who's kind of got it great. Like he's getting hired by Disney when he needs a job. But other than that, he's working with A24, who's one of the only studios that actually seems to still care more about the quality of their films than the corporate profits.
And are willing to give maybe an unproven commercial director, like somebody who's not a sure thing at the box office, a decent budget to make a movie they actually want to make.
Yeah, the fact that like he decided to continue and they gave him the money to make this film is awesome because, yeah, he didn't have to dig himself out with the lowest of low budget stuff. He got to make a really cool movie. And it's just a shame that it didn't catch fire.
The timing could have had a lot to do with it. People were still a little hesitant to go to the theater in summer 2021 for obvious reasons. You can't fault anyone for that. But I will say that I was not one of those people because I'm a brave boy.
You are.
I went and saw The Green Knight in theaters.
You passed the test. And I was trying to think because I think this came out on Amazon Prime.
Shortly after theater, like maybe a couple weeks. Yeah, it was a very short exclusivity window.
So that was worth something. But now I think it's on Max right now. So I'm like, okay, somebody's still making money selling this movie around from streamer to streamer. It seems like the kind of movie, for whatever that we always remark on, it's not the same as the DVD era where studios could make really big money on movies on home video. But it's a winner for streamers. It's the kind of movie that you're like, oh, my service got this cool movie. I'm going to turn this on. So hopefully they're spending some money and that's still going into the final bottom line of how this movie is viewed by the studio.
This is actually, it's an interesting thing you bring up about streaming because when I think about what we've lost from the era of like Blu-rays and DVDs, this is a movie I would have loved to just get a huge collector's edition Blu-ray of and kind of see all the documentaries and commentaries and things like that. That's the stuff that I feel we've really missed out on in the last decade or so since we've moved away from all that.
This is a perfect example of that type of movie that would just be so much fun to dive into that stuff.
And I wonder if that's going to hurt the long-term prospects of cult hits because so much, I'm sure there will be opportunities for that information to get out, but it won't be as streamlined and easy to access. Like maybe there will be a Green Knight documentary in 10 years, but it won't be readily available when it hits DVD that you can immediately dive into the expanded world more.
Yeah, there still is a small market where physical media is being created for movies, but it's nothing like it was. And I've seen this repeated online multiple times. It's like, why not record the director's commentary and include that with streaming services? That's like another thing that could keep your users on your service for multiple watches of the same film, especially for movies like this. There's got to be an eager audience for it, and they haven't figured it out yet.
The cynical side of me says that capitalism is a race to the bottom, and that would take money and time and people to make all those things happen. And who's going to pay for it all? It feels like right now streamers, especially the Maxes of the world, because fuck David Zaslav, are like just trying to get the absolute most content for the least amount of money and effort they can. And what we're describing takes effort and money and manpower that they probably don't want to invest in a little fantasy movie from 2021.
Yeah, it's very strange. Somehow the financial incentives are not there, but it does seem like they would make sense in terms of the viewership incentives for the streamers themselves. But maybe it's a question of who has the original ownership and the rights to be able to produce that content. Because, yeah, Zaslav is not going to acquire The Green Knight for a 3-month run on his service and pay to have something else produced.
Right. It feels like something Lowery would have to package, or like A24 would have to package with the movie.
Yeah, if they had done that up front and had it ready as part of what they're offering to stream, but that just must not be in the contract language, that nobody's prepared to negotiate that. And it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think we saw with the strikes that just so much of contracts around streaming releases are a black box that neither side truly understands, which is alarming. The entire industry moved to a model that no one really grasps 100%.
No one can understand it. And like you brought up at the top of the show, Apple TV is one of the outliers where like they spend huge amounts of money for shit that they put on their service and you'd never know it was there, man.
They don't tell anybody about it.
It's so weird. What are they doing? It's like corporate vanity projects, and yet they don't want to claim any of the glory. It doesn't even, none of this stuff adds up. It's very hard for us normal movie watchers to make sense of it all.
Yeah, like I knew Presumed Innocent was happening because I listened to The Watch and Andy Greenwald and Chris Ryan were talking about it. But if you're not plugged into that kind of extracurricular consumption of media, you would have no idea that show existed. And it's got Jake Gyllenhaal in a real 90s throwback courtroom thriller. It was a fun time, by the way. But yeah, what are you doing, Apple? Put some advertising money behind your production budgets and tell the world about this stuff, because they're cranking out the best original content right now, I think.
Some really good stuff, yeah. It makes you feel weird when you watch it. Like, am I supposed to be watching this? Because this show doesn't even exist in the public consciousness. How is it that I get to watch it? And it's got huge stars. And
some kind of super complicated tax write-off that I don't understand? Possibly. Let's talk about Dev a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So Dev didn't do much between this movie and 2024's breakout action movie. People are saying it might be the next John Wick. Monkey Man.
Yeah, Monkey Man's cool.
I still haven't seen it. I really want to. I should. Maybe I'll watch it tonight, actually.
You got to see it.
Love Dev. And that's like a real passion project of his, which kind of explains the long gap, because he didn't just star in it. He wrote, directed, produced it, and probably had a hand in the editing too. Who knows? But that project seemed to consume him for several years.
That's a big move. He had to go into a cocoon, but it worked out for him. He's such a likable actor that I think he has a ton of goodwill just from the public in general. So there was a lot of enthusiasm when Monkey Man came out. Like, oh my gosh, Dev's doing his own thing, and he's given us a badass John Wick level action movie with a twist to it that's something fresh we haven't seen in a South Asian setting. And it's really cool for a lot of reasons. And he's really fun as an action star. I really like that movie.
Yeah, and it was a hit. It didn't make huge piles of money, but it made close to $40 million on a $10 million budget. So it quadrupled its budget, which means it definitely cleared into profitability.
Nice.
And it's great to see. And I think that's the new reality, is that you can make a movie that makes money, but it's going to make a little bit of money if it's not tied to IP or an existing franchise. But you just got to keep your budgets under control and get creative.
That's probably the hardest thing. It seems like there's always been room for some of those kind of movies that are really scrappy and produce something that over delivers on a small budget. What's really hard is making the next one and keeping that aesthetic, because you can't always underpay your cast and your crew because you're like trying to launch something new. Now it's like, now you're established. How do you do another movie, bring it in on a tight budget so that it can continue to make money, even if it doesn't shatter box office records.
I wonder if we're going to get a Monkey Man 2 one day.
It feels like they ought to. I hope he can make that happen.
It's not on the immediate horizon for Dev because he's got a couple other things in the pipeline. He's got Wicker, which is, as far as I could tell, the only cast announced for that is him and Olivia Colman, which is a very interesting pairing.
Interesting.
A fisherwoman lives on the fringes of a seaside village. She's unmarried, stinky, and constantly teased. One day, sick of her stuffy, narrow-minded neighbors, she orders a wicker husband for herself. So that sounds real weird and exciting. Olivia Colman's very charming, and obviously Dev is too, so that should be one I'll check out.
Yeah, that sounds neat. Whimsical fantasy premise.
To contrast with that, he also has Rabbit Trap, which is in post-production, so that should be coming out sooner. Married couple Daphne and Darcy Davenport are two musicians who moved from London to a cottage in Wales to complete their new album. By accident, they record a mystical sound never heard before and gradually disconnect from reality. Sounds bananas and fun.
Psychological horror sci-fi thriller. Cool premise again.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I know anything from this director, and I don't. Bryn Chaney is the director of that one, but nothing stands out. A lot of shorts. I think this might be this is their full-length debut.
Neat.
So, yeah, he's picking interesting projects that sound, at least on paper, sound really cool.
Does sound like he's still making cool choices.
So I'm excited for that. And I know something else I'm excited for, and something I know you're excited for, is next episode's movie.
Yeah.
But you were pushing for this one for a while, and we made it happen.
I guess it has been a while, because I forgot what happens in this movie.
Its critics will tell you not a lot, but we'll have the final say on that. We're doing Ad Astra, the Brad Pitt, Tommy Lee Jones, father-son space drama directed by James Gray, a director I'm quite fond of. And we've both seen this movie already, but like you said, it's been a while. We've forgotten big chunks of it. And then I think we're going to take a long break from Brad Pitt after this one.
Yeah.
Seems like a dickhead.
It'd be nice to put some distance. I remember liking him in this movie. I remember liking it. I remember it being moody space drama, which is a cool genre. Maybe the pinnacle of that was Moon. So if it has some of that cool, spooky space drama vibes, we'll get to talk about it in length next episode.
And then after that is the one I've been waiting for years. I'm not going to spoil it yet. You can check the letterbox list.
Check it.
So that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod if you can.
Please.
We appreciate that. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram, or both would be best, at Blast Zone Pod, so you don't miss anything. You can email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. Any movie recommendations, feedback, suggestions.
We're always getting interesting recs through the emails and DMs. It's cool to get those.
Yeah. We had a listener, Van, write in and recommend the Jake Gyllenhaal drama, The Guilty, to us this week. And I haven't had a chance to respond to the email. I'll just respond to it here. I've seen it, but Ian hasn't, so now it's on him to check it out. I remember liking it.
Yeah.
Antoine Fuqua, I believe, directed that one, the Training Day director.
Oh, cool.
He's had a very up and down career since Training Day, though, so take that for what you will. All right, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.
Motherfucker, go boom. Motherfucker.